first of all, I just want to start this video out by saying thank you. The comments that have been coming through and the emails that have been coming through are just fantastic. There are a lot of people that are really eager to learn color theory, and it's something that I wasn't quite sure was going to be something that people would be interested to begin with. So this type of feedback and the community that's being developed here is absolutely phenomenal. Thank you very much. And I want to reiterate that once you are using this system, the color zone system, you're going to have unlimited potential with the color in your photograph. So what we did was we touched on color theory in the last bonus video where we talked about the color wheel, the multiple types of color wheel, and how to use elements of the color wheel in your photography. So what we're going to do now is we're going to put that in place right here in Adobe Camera Raw. Before I do that, I just want to introduce myself again for those who might be just popping in. I'm Blake Rudis from Everyday HDR and HDRinsider.com, and I'm really excited to show you this color zone system. So let's go into Adobe Camera Raw to do some color theory editing. Okay, before we begin the color theory editing in Camera Raw, I want to tell you that all of the images that I'm going to be using here are available for download at the bottom of this page next to the Facebook comments. Now, I don't want you to download it quite yet. Just go ahead and give me some of your attention on this first, and then once I'm done, you can kind of take what you've learned and use them to your advantage. This video is also available for download at the bottom of the page. Now, before we begin, you have to kind of set up your Photoshop to be prepared to accept TIFF images for Camera Raw. So we have to go to Edit and go to Preferences and then go to Adobe Camera Raw. It just says Camera Raw down here at the bottom. So down here, you want to put JPEG and TIFF handling. So you want this to say automatically open all supported TIFFs. Now, I usually disable JPEG support because it's really a pain for me to pull in JPEGs into Adobe and go into Camera Raw because I don't really see the point. Usually when I save something as a JPEG, I'm saving it as a JPEG because I'm done with that photograph and I don't need to edit it anymore. I save it for JPEG before I maybe print it. I save it for JPEG before I maybe put it on the internet. Before I do anything with the design, maybe I save it for JPEG just to be pushed out as a preview. The only thing I open in Camera Raw are RAW files and TIFF files because of the amount of information that is stored in a 16-bit TIFF, which is usually how I save all of my images, and a RAW file. So have it set to automatically open all supported TIFFs. And that's going to be important in a second here because all of the images that I've given you for the download are TIFF images. Okay, so press OK, go to File, Browse in Bridge. So here I'm in Bridge. I need to go to my desktop because that's where I have the stuff. I'm going to click on the video 2 bonuses and I'm going to grab all of these and just basically just select these. If you've never used Bridge, it's pretty easy. You just navigate to where you want to go, select the images, right click and say open in Camera Raw. So all of these images are now going to open in Camera Raw. Now these 3 and 4, we'll get to these photos. Don't do anything with these photos yet. We're going to start right here with this Hakone Gardens video. Photo for the video. So Hakone Gardens is actually in the Bay Area of San Francisco where we lived before I moved out to the Midwest, and this is a beautiful place to shoot in, and you can tell by this photograph that it has the potential to be beautiful, but it's missing some color to make it beautiful. Now, I did not modify the color in this in any way to discredit the color to try and make it look like I could make it better. I just want you to know that. I didn't do that. I have chosen this photograph because it has the potential to be more. Let's look at all of the different ways that we can edit with color theory now. So as I stated in the last one, we talked about complementary colors and how important that is for photographers. Well, look right here. The very first spot we have for color theory editing in Adobe Camera Raw is temperature and tint. And temperature, you get either blue or yellow. And guess what? They are complements of each other on the digital color wheel. See how that works? You add more yellow, you're taking away blue. You add more blue, you're taking away yellow. See, it's all coming together now. I knew it would. Here's the same thing with tint, magenta and green. What are they? I hope you said complements, and they are opposite of each other in the color wheel. So if you add magenta, you are removing green. All right, I'm glad you said that with me. And if you add green, you're removing magenta. Awesome. So that is the basics of white balance editing. You can influence the white balance in your photograph by adding more blue or yellow or green or magenta. Now in this photograph, it looks like it might need a little bit more magenta. It's quite green on the green side and taking away from areas of red. So I'm going to make that a little bit more on the magenta side. And if I look at the blue and yellow, and here's the thing, when it comes to white balance, It's subject to the individual, all right? Many times I have heard people say, well, the color's not right, or this isn't right, or I don't like the way your color looks in this. And what it comes down to is the color is up to you. You are the artist. You choose the color. Now, you can do some technical flaws with your color, and we'll talk about that. But when it really comes down to it, you are the person who's modifying your color. You are the artist. You are the person giving it to the viewer. If the viewer doesn't like it, guess what? That's the viewer's interpretation. You have to decide, are you making art for you? Are you making pictures for you, or are you making pictures for the viewer? Okay? Just want to put that out there. So I'm going to look, when I do this, it's kind of subjective. I'm just kind of bouncing back and forth until I find something that my eye likes. My eye tends to like this. So I can look at the before and after and see that I've had a little bit of blue and a little bit of magenta here. It's very subtle at this point, but it works. Okay, so I'm not going to do anything with the exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks, because all that stuff pretty much deals with tints and tones, and I'm not really worried about that right now. What I'm worried about teaching you is color theory. So now we have vibrance and saturation. Now the way vibrance works, vibrance is a very interesting adjustment, because when you move it up, not everything gets more saturation. Vibrance is a way to protect your skin tones and make everything else around those skin tones more vibrant. So if you increase the vibrancy, yes, it looks like it's getting more saturation. It looks like you are getting more saturation from that, because you are, but it's protecting certain tones along the way. Now, a straight saturation boost, now you're just adding a bunch of saturation to the photo. This is not good. I don't like this. So again, I have to reiterate that phrase that it depends on who you're making the artwork for. If you're making art for you and you like this, by all means, go right ahead. I don't like it, so I'm not going to do it. I like to get into my colors and really exploit the colors individually. Obviously, that's where the whole color zone system and beyond the wheel training gets you into in Photoshop. And what I'm telling you is, what I'm going to show you here in Camera Raw is absolutely nothing compared to what you're going to be doing with the color zone system. So you're going to see how powerful this is. And when you see that this is nothing compared to what you can do with the color zone system, that's where things start to get impressive. So we looked at the white balance, we looked at the vibrance and saturation. Let's go into the heaviest hitter on this whole color theory editing that we have here, and that's the HSL adjustment. We talked about this in the last bonus video. HSL, hue, saturation, luminance, and look how it breaks it down. Camera Raw, in my opinion, does one of the best jobs of breaking down the colors in a way that you can exploit them individually. One of the best jobs, because the best job is, you got it, beyond the wheel of the color zone system. So let's look at red. Here we're in the hue of red, and as I told you before, as you move the hue to the right or to the left, you are changing that color of red. So let me go and look at this. This is our bonus that I've given you that allows you to take a look at all of your colors and see what's happening when you adjust them, okay? So we'll get back to this in a second. What I want to show you with is red. Look at the hue of red. Look at what happens when I change the hue of red. See how it changes color. It's taking the place of the color directly next to it. So when I move this all the way to the right, look at that. Our red turns orange. The color next to it is orange. When I move it all the way to the left, our red turns a red violet, is what they would call that. That's the power of this. Now, with this hue saturation, it's only letting you go one color to the left or to the right. Now, with the hue saturation in Photoshop, it will let you go much farther. It will let you go all the way around the color wheel. So that red would eventually turn into cyan, and that red would eventually turn to cyan on the other side. So if you move it to the right, it will eventually go around all these colors until it hits cyan. If you move it to the left, it will go around all these colors until it hits cyan. Okay? But in Adobe Camera Raw, it puts a governor on you and says, okay, you can only go so far with this hue thing, all right? So just keep that in mind, bear that in mind. And one of the topics in the color zone system, the Beyond the Wheel training package, goes over every single element that I feel necessary to discuss in the color theory process in Photoshop. It shows you all the different adjustments you can do, and it gives you the benefits and limiting factors. And all that's important because when it comes to the color zone system, you are your only limiting factor. All right. So let's go back to this Hakone Gardens picture. So let's look at our hue of red, and let's look where red is. Here is my biggest flaw with all of these ways to edit images. And this is everything. This is every system I've ever used. You cannot see what you're editing. right? Listen, you cannot see what you are editing. You know what you're editing based on the fact that someone's telling you that you're editing red, but you can't actually see what is being affected. I move this and I can start to kind of gather, okay, there's some red here, there might be some here, but I can't physically see any one of these pieces that's being affected. Guess what? The color zone system, you can. You know exactly what part of your photo is being edited when you make the adjustment. That is the power of that system. One of the benefits of that system. So we'll get into that later. Let's look at the reds. So we can modify the reds. I'm going to change the hue of the red to make it a little bit more on that red violet look. So if I look at orange, there's a lot of orange in those rocks. If I move it to the left, it gets like a really red orange, and I don't like that. If I move it to the right, it gets like a yellowish orange, and I can deal with that. So then yellows. We can make the yellows more orange. We can make the yellows more green. See how that works? And what we're doing is we're using the hue. So we're adjusting the hue of that yellow and only moving so far so that the yellow can only turn one color next to it on the color wheel. Okay? This is really important stuff to understand. Alright, so let me move our green a little bit to the right to make it a little bit greener. And then our aquas. If you see our aquas, I don't really know what our aqua is in this, and there might not even be any aqua in this. So I'm not going to worry about that. Blues. There's blue in that water. Look at the blue. Have you ever seen The Wizard of Oz? That right there is a horse of a different color. You see that? You remember that where the horse changes color all the time? It's a horse of a different, whatever. It's a photography joke. Laugh. Okay? So I'm not going to do anything with the hue of the blue. I want to keep the blue. Let's look at our purples. There's not a whole lot of purples in here. Aquas and purples we could probably just throw out completely because they are probably non-existent here. And even magentas. Not a whole lot of magenta in here either. Some colors you're going to find are not in every photograph. So if you get into the color zone system and you press play on that action and you notice that only a couple colors are coming up, that's because those are the only colors that really exist in that photograph. Same thing here. You don't have any aquas, you don't have any purples, you don't have any magentas. They just aren't there. You're not going to get anything out of them. Okay, you can even drop them all the way down or all the way to the left. You're not going to see them. We can see that in the saturation. Let's go to aquas. There are no aquas in this because when we increase the sat, oh, nope, I'm not seeing any. I don't know if you're seeing any. I'm not seeing any. Okay, and let's look at purple. There are no purples in this, and there is no magenta in this photograph. But there's blue. If we increase the saturation of blue, look what happens. Now, you see that blue has a bluish hue to it based off of the color that the camera's picking up. Now, that water wasn't really blue. It was more of a whitish color, probably actually more of a greenish color based on filtration system. But we'll just drop it down because I don't want any blue to be in there. So let's look at the saturation of the greens. We can bump up the saturation of the greens. Now, I will tell you this. In most photographs, green does not control foliage. Yellow usually controls foliage. Just keep that in mind because watch what happens when we increase the yellows. We get a pretty big increase just in these areas. Now, in Camera Raw here, it looks like we aren't really adjusting our foliage too much with that yellow, but if you get into something like Photoshop and you're doing this, you'll see that your foliage is strictly being edited by the yellows. Okay? So oranges, we have a lot of oranges in the tree, we have some oranges on the rocks, and this is saturation now, so we can increase the amount of color that's in there, or we can decrease it. I want to decrease a little bit on the oranges. And then red. We can really bump up the saturation on the red and pretty much get away with it. So I'm going to bring it up pretty high. Now, luminance. Luminance is also called lightness. So if you see lightness in some places and luminance in other places, they are the exact same thing. And we talked about this in the last one. You can make that red a little bit darker. You can make that red a little bit lighter. But here's the thing. Here's the limiting factor with this. You can either make the red lighter or make the red darker. With the color zone system, you can make the red a little bit lighter and not even affect any of the other areas. You won't affect the midtones, you won't affect the shadows. It's pretty impressive. So the lightness of the oranges now, let's bring that up. I like those highlights, the way it's hitting there. Yellows, I'll bring that up a little bit because I like those highlights too. Greens, probably just going to leave that at 0. Aqua, we didn't have any. Blue, look at the lightness of the blue. Now this is pretty powerful. We can make that white really stand out. And naturally, our eyes gravitate towards highlights. So I'm going to bring that up pretty high. So now let's look at this. Here's a pretty cool trick in Camera Raw. I've got this photo here selected, and I have this photo here selected. I want all of the adjustments that I did here to affect here. So I'm going to click on this one, and I'm going to press Control and click on this one and press Synchronize. Synchronize everything. Just do it all for me, press OK. Now look what happens to the color wheel. all the adjustments that we made on this photograph using this hue, saturation, luminance panel affected all of our colors like this. So let's hit the default. And we'll hit the default, and we'll hit the default. That was our original photograph. Or it's not a photograph, it was our original test panel. But when we go back through and we see what we did here, all the edits that we did there are affecting our colors like this. Now, if we go back and we default these all over again and we look at the colors that we knocked out, what colors did we knock out and say didn't even exist in the photograph? Magenta was one of them, and aquas were one of them, which is pretty much our cyans and our purples. So you can see that as we go back, those colors that we knocked out are knocked out accordingly on our test panel here. But if we look at our other colors, we bumped up red pretty well, we bumped up green pretty well, we bumped up yellow pretty well because those were the predominant colors in our photograph. You see how color theory is affected by the choices that you make. The choices that you make in everything that you do, in every form of editing color, are going to do very similar things. So let's go back to this image here. And let's look at, actually, let's go to this one. We're going to look at chromatic aberration. Now, chromatic aberration is something that happens within the lens, especially like with this photograph was taken with a 17 to 40 millimeter lens on the 17 side. So on the 17 side, it has a tendency to make chromatic aberration, especially with those wide angle lenses. And that's where you get like this kind of fringing that happens on your image. Now look at the fringing that's happening. What color is it? We've got a purple, we've got a green. Now, on the old color wheel, purple and green were complements of each other, but pretty much here, a lot of these purple areas that you're seeing here are controlled by magenta, and the greens right here are pretty much cyan. So when we edit these, cyan and magenta are across from each other on the color wheel, right? And that's how we're going to fix this one. So same thing, we've got a purple now. Let's remove chromatic aberration and see what happens. That didn't even do anything. Usually, if you don't have too much of a chromatic aberration, pressing that button will remove them. But let's move up the purple a little bit and watch how we lose our purple. Now we get rid of that fringe, and we get rid of the fringe on the green side. If it doesn't get rid of it, it's because you're not changing the right hue of it. So if we grab the hue and we move the hue over until we find the hue that is affecting our fringe, which is right there, that's where we lose our chromatic aberration. Now this one's set pretty high, but watch what happens if you set it too high. You start to make more chromatic aberration than you needed. So you want to keep these pretty tight and find that color that's making the problem and fix it accordingly. So if we look at our before and after, look at the difference there. And that's by affecting the hue of just the chromatic aberration. Now that's powerful. I'm an HDR photographer. I do a lot of stuff with HDR photography. The biggest thing that I see as a technical flaw is people have a lot of chromatic aberration and don't know how to control them. And it's one of those things that if you're not training yourself to see a chromatic aberration as a technical flaw, you won't know that the chromatic aberration is a technical flaw. All right? So we talked about the hue, saturation, chromatic aberration. Let's look at split toning. Split toning. Split toning is right here. And split toning is where you get the ability to tone your highlights and your shadows individually. So highlighted areas will get a certain tone to it, and your shadow areas will get a certain tone to it. So let's go back to this photograph and clear everything out to the defaults, because I want to show you how this is going to be affected on our image. So let's go here and let's go to that split toning. So with split toning, nothing's going to happen. If you move these hues up, nothing will happen unless you have saturation bumped up. Okay? So just remember that. Nothing is going to happen with your hues in your photograph. You're not going to get any split toning unless you move the saturation up. So let's move the saturation up to about 50% on both sides of this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the hue of the highlights yellow, and I'm going to make the hue of the shadows blue. So now we get like a cross-process split tone image. If I want to decrease the saturation or increase it to add more, you can. Now, we talked about how certain colors interact and react with one another. Let's look at what happens when we change that. Change the highlights to blue and the shadows to yellow. It's not as compelling. I like it when the darkest complementary color takes on the shadows and the lightest complementary color takes on the highlights. This is essentially cross-processing right in Adobe Camera Raw. You can save this as a preset and be using it on any one of your photographs as you see fit. So you can save this as a preset in here. Alright, so let's see what happens though when we synchronize this one with this one. So we'll control-click this one and press synchronize and see what happens. So you see what happened when we split toned it? Here's let's go to drop the saturation down in these, and bring the saturation up in these. All those dark areas start to get that blue, and the highlights start to get the yellow. So that's how we're affecting our colors with split toning. And split toning is typically subtle, but it does leave a lasting effect. Another thing that you can affect here is the curves. So in the curves, you can actually go into the curves adjustment layer. Let's go ahead and clear these out. You can go into the curves adjustment layer here. And if you change this to linear, so here it's set to linear, and on the point, not the parametric, but the point, you can go into the RGB, the red, green, and blue, and you can change the colors in your entire photograph. So here's a little bit highlight in the red. Now, see what I'm doing here? See how I'm affecting that? And I'm affecting just the highlighted areas and just adding more red to the highlighted areas. That is essentially what you're doing with the color zone system. But instead of it happening on the entire photo, it's only happening in the colors you select. See how that works? Last thing I want to cover here is the graduated filter, because the graduated filter has the ability to affect your temperature and your tint accordingly, which again is another color theory option. So if we bring and drag this down, and we'll drag it right to the top of those buildings, and we add more blue to this, and maybe increase the magenta a little bit, maybe decrease the exposure to get a lot of blue in there, and increase the highlights, and maybe increase the clarity to get some more depth in those clouds. Don't want to increase the saturation, I don't like that. So now we've affected the top of our photograph accordingly. Now if we go from the bottom and bring it up, we don't want that blue down there, right? But see how I have these opposites? Let's switch their places. So this was at -37, this is +33. Let's bring this to +33, or 37. Bring this down to -37. See how this gets more green down here and this gets more blue up here just by inverting what we had selected? That's pretty cool. I really like doing that. I do that all the time, because that right there is what it's doing is it's giving you two different color temperatures on the same photo, but because you're using their direct opposites on the color wheel, it doesn't look bad. It actually amplifies the photograph. So that's another cool thing that you can do with Adobe Camera Raw and color theory editing, because that is directly related to the color theory of the opposites and how opposites create harmony with those complements. So I just basically did a complement graduated filter. So I don't know if you've ever seen that one before. That one's pretty cool. I just want to take the time to say thank you for keeping the conversation alive with myself and with others by using the Facebook comments below. It's really cool that we can come together as a community like this and learn with one another. So I've got one more video coming up on the 9th that's going to be an introduction to the color zone system, this Beyond the Wheel of the Color Zone System training package, and I'm really excited to share it with you. So if you could just do me a favor and keep the conversation going by using the Facebook comments below and downloading this stuff. I want you to have this stuff. I want you to work with this stuff. If you can download these and start working on these so that you can start better understanding color theory today, that's awesome, because then you don't have to wait so long for the color zone system package to come out. So again, Blake Rudas here. Go ahead and leave me some comments below or shoot me an email. I'm more than happy to carry on the conversation with you.